Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast, the show where Papa Tom spreads wisdom like a smear of cream cheese on an everything bagel. Here's your host, Thom Jennings.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast. I am your host, Thom Jennings, and I will begin by saying thank you to everyone. Special thank you to Josh Kogovan for a great episode last week, and it was a top-rated episode of all time. Top listened to, rated, I guess. Listened, it's same thing, sort of, not really, but it was a great conversation. Really enjoyed it. A lot of food for thought for that one. So if you haven't had a chance to go back into the archives and listen to that, and I've had a wonderful selection of guests over the last few months. Chris Hasenauer was a guest that I had early on, and he's now in a comedy competition in Rochester, and so wishing him the best of luck. My friend Crystal Elliott was just recorded an episode with me for a new podcast that we're working on, kind of an advice column podcast. Dan Glover, of course, if you didn't get a chance to hear that one, Nancy Davis, Bruce Wojcik. Those have been the guests so far, folks. And if you go back, hopefully you can go back and listen to those and enjoy them. But today, the guest is me. Hello, it's me. I'm the only person here. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about fatherhood / grandfatherhood. They are directly related. I guess there's no other way to put it. My wife and I, we were at a concert in a town called Homer, New York, at this lovely theater, whose name escapes me right now. And we were seeing a musician by the name of Brandy Clark. And Brandy Clark, if you haven't had a chance to listen to her, country, Americana, just great. She's just a great songwriter. Her songs are, they have a kind of realism to them that makes them really authentic. You know, I mean, old country music was about the storytelling and things that were happening in people's lives that were real. And Brandy Clark is just a master when it comes to that stuff. And she was getting ready to introduce a song called 3 Kids, No Husband. And she was talking about it, and then she mentioned that the song was about a woman who had 3 kids and she didn't have a husband. But she said, you know, there's fathers out there that have kids and no wife. And I found that refreshing, because there really is that scenario that's out there that the single people usually say single mom. I mean, there's not usually a lot of single dad talk. There's not even a lot of single parent talk. And there's a number of circumstances that could happen to cause single parenthood. It could be divorce, it could be death, it could be addiction, it could be illness, any number of things happen. Deployment. I mean, parents that have one parent that's in the military and the other one is deployed. Even though the parents are married, you still only have one parent at home. And the night that she performed the song, I mean, I'd been dealing with a particularly difficult time at work, and I'm a special education teacher. That's my day job. And the group of kids that I had this year were just incredibly difficult to work with. And I think I may have mentioned on another episode where I was talking about being a special education teacher that a lot of people will come up to you and go, oh, bless your heart for working with these kids. And like they're these mongoloids that nobody wants to deal with, or monsters, or whatever is probably the more proper term. I don't mean to disparage any people with the term mongoloid. So, but whatever the case, people will say that because they think, oh, these kids are really difficult to deal with. And the reality is that they are difficult to deal with. I think that was one of the things that Josh and I discussed on our episode last time, is that just because a kid has special needs doesn't necessarily make them better or worse. They can be very high maintenance at times, and those situations can be incredibly stressful. And in Josh's son's case, Noah, and he's got a mom and a dad there and a lot of support. But now the kids that I worked with this year that were particularly difficult to work with, and I'll qualify that statement because the term difficult can mean a lot of different things to different people. These were kids that really struggled with following basic directions, maintaining any semblance of I use the term order, and I'm not a super orderly teacher. I mean, I tend to tell dad jokes. I try to keep the atmosphere loose, all those types of things. I'm not this regimented instructor that expects the kids to sit with their hands folded and make it through the lesson and not say anything, because that's an unrealistic expectation when it comes to working with, I think, any student. I mean, if it's possible, we've heard stories about how the Catholic nuns used to beat their students into submission and whatnot. But this group was just particularly difficult to deal with, especially because we had in the Buffalo, New York area, we had a mass shooting and a bunch of people were killed, and some of our students were closely affected. Knew some of the people that died in the incident. Terrorist attack is really the only way that you can put it. And so emotions were running significantly high, but you also had to remember that the staff was dealing with their own trauma when it came to the incident as well. And the part where they had the most difficulty with was any kind of sympathy. And when you as an adult are dealing with death, whether it's somebody that you know personally or large societal death. I had a conversation with my friend the other day about the situation in Ukraine right now with Russia. And he said, it's really difficult for me to watch the news and see these bombed out apartment buildings and see people that are dead in the street. And he's like, does that bother you? And I'm like, of course it bothers me. And as it's society, I guess, in some ways has made it so that we as human beings, we try to, at least on some level, be sympathetic to the plight of others. And those that don't have the ability to do that, we've labeled them as sociopaths, and sociopaths are typically on the way to prison, So it's difficult when you're dealing with, in my case, these are kids that are 12, 13 years old. But my teacher's assistant that I work with and I were having a conversation one day, and we noted that of the kids that we work with, the kids in our homeroom, and it's a 6-1-1 class, there's 6 students, 1 teacher, 1 aide, that none of them had a father that was active in their life. They didn't have a father that was living at home with them. So they were all either in single-parent households with a step-parent, or being raised by grandparents. Or even in one case, it was a foster parent. So if there's a point in there, and this all comes around the same time that Roe v. Wade has been overturned. So we can expect to some degree some more children that are coming into the world. And for years, especially after my stint in the court system seeking custody of 2 of my 3 kids, and actually there were points where I sought custody of my oldest one as well, and that was unsuccessful. And then from the lessons learned in that, I tried that much harder in the second case to retain custody. I don't want to say obtain, because I had custody all along. We split up, and I kept the kids with me. But being a dad in the court system, the way that society treats you, and even in the sense that the things that people say when it comes to a father getting custody of their kids, people will say things like, "Oh boy, that mother must have been absolutely awful." And as much as that may be true, the reality is sometimes the father's just a better parent. But an ideal scenario is having at least one parent who's heavily invested in the kid's life, creating some kind of structure, some kind of order. But the most important thing, and this is going to sound real wishy-washy, folks, just a warning, the most important thing they need is love. They need somebody that's there that really loves them, and through love they're going to provide structure. They're going to provide discipline in a way that isn't punitive in nature, but it is loving. And so when you don't have either both parents or a father, then the kid's in rough case now, in rough shape. Now, in my case here, it's a very small sample size, so I'm dealing with a little bit of, I guess the proper terminology is operational bias. So based on my sample of students that I've worked with that haven't had a 2-parent household, or at least had a father figure, a strong father figure, somebody that is there for them. As I mentioned earlier, when the student says a stepfather there, but the stepfather and the kid had a very combative relationship, and it was clear that the stepfather didn't want the kid around. And this is, when you're working with kids in special education, you get a pretty deep background, and you get a deep dive into everything that's going on in their lives. And I get that. I hate to admit it, but I dated women that had kids when I was between marriages, and there were situations where I just didn't like the kids at all. I just didn't want to deal with them, which is odd coming from somebody who's a special education teacher, but I'm human. And the kids on some level were a bit of a deal breaker. But if nothing else, if you're trying to raise somebody else's kids, if you're a step parent and you're doing it well, God bless you, because it ain't easy. It's not. And my kids put my wife through a bit of hell when we first started dating. But eventually we've all come to this understanding, and they've embraced her as my wife and as their stepmom. And everybody sort of figured out their role, and she's a wonderful grandmother. So all that stuff has happened. But really the point of this episode is that societally we have moved in a direction which is positive, in the sense that we're looking at trans rights. We're looking at situations with racism towards different races, whether it's African American, Asian hate, all those things. We're having all of these conversations out there in terms of our society, and how as a society we can become more loving, and how we can be better, and how can we coexist in a way that's better. And I know that on a typical day, if you spend a little bit too much time watching the news, or a little bit too much time scrolling through social media, you're going to see all this hate pushed out there. And that's always going to exist. I just think it's part of human nature for people to want to stir up the pot. It's, in some ways, it's much more interesting to talk about controversial issues than it is something that's really mundane. And going back to my own personal samples, so I have an episode dealing with discussing guns, the Second Amendment. I have an episode dealing with abortion, and those were very popular episodes. Of the episodes where it was just me and without a guest, those are the two most listened to episodes, because people, they may be difficult topics, but controversy is certainly more interesting than talking about maybe how to plant a flower bed. But there's going to come a time where you want to plant a flower bed, and you're going to look up a YouTube video or learn from somebody. And maybe that's not a perfect comparison, but hopefully you get where I'm coming from. So the point is that here as a society, we've moved toward being able to discuss these issues. There's not perfection in them. We still have a ways to go. That's a very often used phrase. It's like, well, we have made progress, but we have a ways to go. But there's one area where we've made zero progress, in my mind, over the last... Well, I went through my custody battle in 2001 through 2003. Might have been 2004. As you get older, this stuff gets to be faded. It fades from memory. It was about 2.5 years in the courts and $23,000 worth of legal fees. And this is in the early 2000s. So I can't even imagine what it would be like today. And my dog is barking, going, I can't believe you spent that much money, Dad. You could have bought a bunch of dog toys. But in all seriousness, that back then, the percentage of fathers that had custody of their kids, or that were even actively involved in their kids' lives, was minuscule. And you can look up the statistics in terms of custody, and people may say, oh, there's progress. But it's a twofold issue. And the first thing being is that the way the courts treat males, fathers, and this may just go back to the idea of, I've had cats. I remember I had this one cat named Ralph, and the cat was in heat, and we did everything in our power to keep that cat from going outside, because we were a bunch of irresponsible stoners, and we didn't want kittens. But Ralph, who was a female, yes, we thought Ralph was a boy, which is why Ralph had the name Ralph, would go into heat, and we'd be like, oh, man, hey, whatever you do, guys, just don't let the cat out. The cat always figured a way to get outside. And so I came home one day, and Ralph's outside the apartment door and getting mounted, and there's like another cat standing in line. It's like, whoa. Now, the kittens are born in, of all places, my bag of socks, because I was lazy. I never sorted my socks. I kept them all in a garbage bag. I'm in my early 20s, folks. I wasn't the most organized. I'm not organized now. I have a wife that helps me with that stuff. So the point being is that the male cat, impregnates the female and it just kind of takes off. It's not like the male cat came around and said, hey, what can I do to help raise these kittens with you? And I am shocked beyond all belief at the level of absentee fatherism that is out there. I am shocked by it. It crosses racial bounds. It crosses economic bounds to a certain extent. It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing that as a bunch of guys, we can't get together and just say, you know what? We need dads in kids' lives. We need dads in kids' lives. And if this is offensive to people that say, oh, we're moving past this whole gender identity and all that stuff, I don't care. I really don't. And you know what? I worked with a couple when I was doing social work where the father was transgender. So the kid had two moms, but there were still two parents there. And I've had friends who had two moms. I got friends that had two dads. But what I'm talking about is just overall society. I'm talking about these male guys that for whatever reason are like those cats that stood outside my apartment door waiting to impregnate somebody and just take off. It blows my mind. Now, I had a really good friend many years ago, and this was in the 1990s, and he lived above me in an apartment complex when my ex-wife and I were still together. And we had split up for a short period of time and then began the court process of the custody battle, and then we reconciled. And it's like I say that, why the heck did I reconcile? I always question myself, but we did, whatever the case. I can't go back and change the past. But he lived above us, and he had been split up with his wife, and he had two kids, and he was a single father. And I really respected that because I knew the difficulty, even in not fully going through that particular court case, which eventually happened. It's kind of like the Civil War. The United States tried to avoid it for a long time. Eventually, it's going to happen. If you got a bad marriage, at some point, it's going to split up. And if you got kids, there's going to be custody issues. And if you can figure out how to do 50-50, that's cool. God bless you. A lot of people have a really difficult time with that. If you can't get along as a husband and wife, who's to say you're going to be able to agree on how to parent your kids? And the people that are able to do that, you are wonderful. You serve as an example. But we all can't do that. So he, back in the day, was he was one of the first people that I knew that had a computer that was able to go online. So he goes online. He's on AOL. And AOL Instant Messenger, when it first came on, for those of you old enough to remember it, it was literally like a thing. I don't know how, I'm not even really sure how you met people through it, but there were ways where you could go and it was, that you just find people. So he wound up finding some woman in Florida, and we lived in a town called Hamlin, New York, which is near Rochester, New York. And he starts this whole online relationship with her, going back and forth. And then, next thing she's coming up to visit. And then the next thing he's in love. And then the next thing he says, I'm going to move in with this woman down in Florida. And the next thing he gets rid of his kids, gives them back to his ex-wife because he wants to go pursue this relationship in Florida. And I will never, ever forget the conversation that I had with this guy. Because I said to him, I go, you know what? It's guys like you that screw it up for the rest of us. That when the situation comes where you have a father that really wants to stay active in their kids' lives and has to go through the court system and has to maneuver it, it's the guys like you that just walk away from their kids that just mess it up. So if there's a point, it's a twofold issue. We as guys need to hold other guys and other fathers accountable to their children. Hold them accountable to their kids. Now, they should be good husbands. They should be nice to their wives. They shouldn't be cheating on their wives. And I'll tell you, maybe this is an old-fashioned notion, but if you're the kind of guy that's screwing around on your wife, and your wife's home, and she's got kids, you're pretty much screwing around on your kids too, because that's her mom. So as great as it is to pursue your love and make sure that your loins are good and that you find your soulmate and all that stuff, you have a responsibility as a father. And if fathers don't fight for the right to be in their kids' lives, then fewer fathers are going to be in their kids' lives. And in turn, when the time comes that there is a guy that wants to be in his kid's life, he's going to have that much harder of a time because they're still going to be fighting the stereotype of that tomcat who just rolls up, impregnates my little cat Ralph, and just takes off. So, again, to come back full circle to that original thing where Brandy Clark made that comment, I found it so refreshing because now when I went to college, I was taking a child psychology class. It was just one of those big seminar things, and means it was held in an auditorium and was basically a lot of, PowerPoint slides. And the professor was a female, and she's going on and on. She's very highfalutin. It was adolescent psychology was actually the name of the course. And thankfully at the time nobody was putting up a roof. You could probably hear that in the background. I could. It's not going to make for great podcasting, but I'm doing it anyway. I'm going to close the window and I'll edit a little bit of this out. Much better. A little less. Boy, it's construction time here in Oakfield, New York. Everybody's getting stuff done to their house. So as I was saying before, I was taking this class in what's called adolescent psychology, and the professor was a female, and she's in this room, and there's a whole bunch of students, hundreds of them, and doing a bunch of PowerPoint slides. And if you were smart, which evidently I wasn't, you pretty much sit back and roll through the course, get the PowerPoint slide printouts, and then she gave 4 tests. It was an easy course. But one of the things you definitely didn't want to do was ask any kind of question or engage with the professor because here's the thing, anybody that decides to ask a question is just going to prolong the class and is going to get the dagger eyes from everybody in the room. Well, I was pretty good at that up until one point, and then there was this whole section on the impact of, single parenting on a kid, and the professor kept using the term single mother. It was never single parent, and so I raised my hand and I said, "Listen, I'm not trying to stir up crap here, but I just want to say that the term single mom. I'm custodial parent of a couple of kids. I prefer to use the term single parent." Now you might think. It's funny because the stereotype of a college professor is always like, these liberal college professors and their liberal indoctrination. You might think that this female professor would be like amenable to that and say, "Oh, of course, and I never meant to offend anybody with that term. Of course, we will use a more neutral." I guess that was like a gender neutral term when you say single parent. She got super indignant and proceeded on this tirade about how that the single father sample size was so small that you really couldn't even do a proper study on it, which was basically saying, hey, yeah, it's cool you want to go with this whole single parent thing, or maybe even imply that there's a lot of single dads, but you're an anomaly, kid. Like, you, as a father having custody of kids, you're an anomaly. You're not normal. And it's like, I guess it's strange because, like, to me, I wasn't necessarily an anomaly because I knew other guys that had custody of their kids. It's rare. But I suppose it's like anything. This may seem a little bit off on a bunny trail, but it's like when I drove a blue Hyundai, I kept seeing other blue Hyundais on the road. I wouldn't notice them. And then when I started driving a silver Ford Fusion, I started seeing other silver Ford Fusions on the road. So unless you're a single dad, you probably don't notice as many single dads as there are out there. So maybe you see more of them than actually exist. But it still comes down to the fact that as men, as dads, we really are not holding each other accountable in this area. And until we do, until guys band together, and even if it's just an awareness campaign where they say, look, we want to be a part of our kids' lives, nothing's going to happen. Now, there was an event many years ago, and I probably should have done a little research before I just started running my mouth about this off the cuff, but I'm going to run my mouth off about it off the cuff. If I get some facts wrong, this is an apology in advance, but I think I'm correct in the basic premise. There was a thing called the Million Man March. This was many years ago. I believe it was in the 90s. And the premise behind the Million Man March was to instill a sense of pride in men and basically to say to men, get your crap together. Get a job, hold a job, support your household, be a good husband, be a good father. Now, I may be incorrect. It may have been targeted specifically towards African-American males. And let me tell you something. If you really want to figure out like who your racist friends are, they've already pretty much said, well, this is a black issue. This is a black and white issue. Black fathers are the ones that are the absentee dads. They're the ones that take off and don't pay attention to their kids. And that's not true. That's not true. Because the guy I was talking about earlier, he's a white guy. And I'm not racist, but most of my friends are white. And most of the scumbags that I know that have cheated on their wives, that had kids at home, white. A lot of white dudes. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, this ain't a black or white issue. This isn't a race issue. This is a parenting issue. And what color you are doesn't matter. Your economic circumstances, yeah, they matter. They really do. I get that part of it. And even as we now look at the current situation with Roe v. Wade being overturned, people are calling out the hypocrisy and saying, you know what? If you want to protect babies, then the government better come up with some money to help support these kids. Well, that's all fine and dandy. You can throw money at the kids. But see, here's the issue with that, too. Look at our tax system. Our income tax system penalizes you for being married. It penalizes you. It makes more sense as a couple not to get married and maybe even not to live together than it does to get married. Because when you're a single parent, you have access to all kinds of tax breaks, all kinds of stuff like that. Now, I'm not saying that if you're a single parent that you don't need extra help. You absolutely do. But you know what, when money gets in the way, it changes things. It really does. So if you're in a mediocre relationship and the money's not great, and maybe the dad doesn't have a good job, or maybe the dad doesn't even hold down a job, you ain't going to marry him. Because if you do, it's going to cost you money. So we got to look at that too. We got to look at what we can do as a society to not just throw money at the whole single parent thing. And in as much as we should have sympathy, and in my case, empathy for being a single parent, because let me tell you, I did it. It sucked. It just plain sucked at times. At times. Now, I wouldn't, if I'd go back and find some woman on AOL and hang out in Florida, never in a million years. Wouldn't do it. The sucky part was always the economics. It was difficult. It was just difficult to get by, even with child support. But we can't just turn dads into child support machines either. Or moms, whatever. That goes both ways. Because here's the other thing with our legal system that's still kicking around that nobody seems to be complaining about when it comes to equal rights or equal anything. You can go to the court and get child support from a guy, and you don't have to give them visitation to his kid, or vice versa, because they're independent. Now, I'm sure there's reasons for it, but it sure would make more sense to have a system in place, some kind of arbitration system, some kind of legitimate family court system, something that truly encourages not only the financial support of the kid, but the emotional support. Because this may sound like really drippy and really liberal, but kids are going to be a lot better off with a parent that is physically present than a wallet that comes from their father filled with money. Right? Yeah. I mean, and if you don't agree with that, so be it. I see it. I live it. Kids need people present in their lives. If they're blessed enough to have grandparents, that's even better. Aunts, uncles. You know, God forbid you have a young lady who falls in love. And you know, we fall in love with people that aren't good for us. I get it. Love leads to sex. Sex leads to baby. Best of intentions. Father takes off. Gets whatever. And that woman has no family support system. If she was like a single child, if her parents had passed away and she's got nobody else in the world to help support her, that's a horrible situation. Horrible. So that's what we're fighting against as a society. And maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't hear this kind of stuff being talked about. If we're going to talk about equal rights, we've really got to talk about equal rights for parents. If there was a situation where if you look at the percentages of fathers that get custody of their kids versus mothers, if there was any other situation, we would call it discrimination. There's X amount of percentage of men, X amount of percentage of women. A lot more women get the kids than the dads. So if you want equal rights, it's got to go across the board. Equal pay for equal work. Agreed. I agree with that. I even think that if a female is capable enough of playing in the National Football League, they should be able to. I can't believe that there hasn't been a female that could, at the very least, be a place kicker. And I'm pretty darn sure there's been some females that could physically perform many of the positions on a pro football field. So but those are the things that, again, we still have these degrees of separation when it comes to gender that are acceptable in society. But we shouldn't continue to have the degree of separation of fathers from their kids. It's wrong. And as a society, we're going to churn out more kids that are confused, that feel unloved, that are going to commit crimes, that ultimately are not going to live up to their potential. Now, there used to be this movement called eugenics, and Hitler took a hold of that, and he basically said, hey, we should just not let these crappy kids get born. I don't believe that. Every kid starts out at pretty much the same starting line when they get out. Yeah, sure, some parents are richer, some parents are poorer, all that. But they've all got potential. They've all got potential. You can't just say, oh, we're going to abort them. We're going to, sterilize people that shouldn't have babies, any of that stuff. What we need to do as a society is promote family values in a way and this used to be a buzzword for conservatives, but family values, when they said it, it meant, family values is mom, dad, no gay people, any of that. I'm talking real family values. I'm talking about parents that are in their kids' lives. And again, I couldn't care less if it's two moms, if it's two dads, or if it's a mom and a dad and the dad is a female. But they need those roles in their life. So, I guess that's about it. I feel like I was a little bit on the angry side today. Maybe it was all the banging from the roof and a little bit of dog barking. But you know what? As I've tried to say thematically throughout this whole podcast, if we can't have these real conversations, if we can't discuss them, if we can't bring them up, if we can't be uncomfortable with each other, there's never going to be any progress. Am I hopeful for the future? Yes. Am I hopeful for the near future? No. I think this country has become a bit of a dumpster fire right now. But you know what? Things don't change until something bad happens. Because when things are mediocre, they don't change. They don't change. So a little bit of uncomfortable controversy, whether that come through the Supreme Court or anything, it's okay. We need that every now and then. We need that so that we won't continue to be complacent. But if there was ever a time for somebody to stir up some crap and maybe start a movement to get men to step up to the plate and be dads, the time is 100 years ago. I mean, it should have been done a long time ago. It really should have been. So that's all I got for today. Very bagely, very logic-y, I hope that, and I'm not going to lie, I hope that roof is done very soon. I know everyone's like, oh, I'm sure he has a professional studio somewhere. It's like, no, I'm like in a neighborhood where they replace roofs. But listen, thanks for listening. Sorry if I was a bit heavy today, but that's what we do. And if you like this stuff, cool. If you don't, hey, let me know. I need to know that too. And until next time, this is Thom Jennings thanking you for listening to the Bagel Logic Podcast.